and shame!
Shame and shame!
Not in our name!
Not in our name!
Shame and shame!
Shame and shame!
Not in our name!
Not in our name!
Shame and shame!
Shame and shame!
Not in our name!
Not in our name!
Shame and shame!
Shame and shame!
Not in our name!
Not in our name!
Understand it. Make a noise and make it clear. We're not gonna sit in silence. We're not gonna live in fear. See, young boys try to understand it. Make a noise and make it clear. We're not gonna sit in silence. We're not gonna live in fear.
Just want to bring people on the page for today. A very pressing issue of great concern that should be brought to the attention of everybody, not just here in Victoria today, but also relevant to everybody in Australia. We've just come back from attending a great attendance at a protest here in Melbourne today, which was the protest against the new legislation that the Abbott government are looking to bring in, which affects every one of us, supposedly making it illegal to protest, which is quite a draconian very draconian step to take in what otherwise is considered to be a democratic country with an elected government. However, the reason why I felt it was very important to present this information is because of the concern I have when I see so many people who get very concerned and frustrated, and when protests are organised, we know why everybody's there, and that's because they all feel that something is not right. And when something is not right, it is not just your right to be able to voice what you know is not right, but it's also your duty. Because if people do nothing, well, then you're assured of what you're going to get, and it isn't going to be nice. However, this looks like the path that our government have been leading us down, and it's been a long and gradual process. Now, getting to the point, what I want to say here is that in all of this, the problems that I identify is that people seem to be stuck for a remedy. We can protest and do a lot of rah-rah, but what I would like to point out, and you can check what I'm saying, and first of all I'd like to just make a disclaimer, because I am not a lawyer, I'm an independent researcher. I've done a lot of research and exploration in answers of seeking the truth, and that which constitutes that which is our right and who we are, and what is the premise of law. And what I would like to do is bring people's attention back to the origin of the first point of what constitutes the foundation for a law. And it seems to be forgotten or overlooked. And the basis for the foundation of a guiding principle for the foundation of law, and the first law being acknowledgement and that recognition for everybody's right to life. So if we are all born lodial as a right to life, then anybody who wishes to block that path is essentially not removing your right, they're stopping you from your right. You cannot take laws away from a person that are innate. You are born with given rights. These are not granted to you by another man or a judicial process. There are certain rights that you have. that are just so. In the process of creation, you were made. You are a part of this world, you're a part of this life. And the principle and the teaching of life and the respect to it, and that's a very important word, is respect. Now here what we're seeing by our seemingly uneducated government is that they have assumed a presumption that they actually have a right or a jurisdiction in their quasi-courts to pass legislation that would block you from having the ability to express your right to protest when you know that something is not right. So to block people from what they know in their conscience is wrong, you can never remove that right. That right always remains. So for a government who has been elected under what is meant to be a democratic society, and they've been voted in to represent the wishes of the people, and the people being the Crown, are already entrusted with rights that are inalienable. There are rights that are recognised. And I would put it to, as a suggestion, not just to anybody out there who's listening who wants to research what it is that I'm saying and do your own research, but also to any ministers who have a concern. And I would say that out of your conscience and with coherent awareness and fair reasoning, to ask yourself the question, what right do you have to presume that you can block another from their right? Because to my way of thinking, and I'll put the question, is that not a usurp? So if you are usurped upon to block you from your right, rights that are inalienable, rights that are the guiding principles of the first underlying foundation of law, which is the acknowledgement to acknowledge everybody's right to life. Now the fundamentals to life are that not only do you have access to food, water, shelter, but in a just society, such as Australia is presumed to be, that you have a right to voice your opinion, that you have a right to express your concerns when out of your own conscience, when you know something is not right. Now today what we have experienced is just pure hypocrisy, to have an elected state government presuming and supposedly having legislation drafted, and I would question what law and what court fails to recognise the equity of law, lodial to us all, that which is already recognised within our constitution and to a higher court. These laws that are here to protect us and all people of the Crown, and sovereign to the Crown being the people, is that you cannot remove those rights. You can block our path. But I put it to you, and I'll put it in these terms, and this is what people are failing to identify, including our ministers. And I would like you to check on what I'm saying. But to be a minister and to receive a portfolio, it is not just a responsibility but a privilege to maintain a level of integrity for the people, to maintain your honour at all times. And this falls under what I would suggest is what we understand as trust, meaning as in trust law. Now, if you want to do the research on trust law, there are some basic principles. Our courts are run, and I suggest to you, I make this mention, that the court is also run under trust law, and that a judge is a trustee, and that a prosecutor is also known as a PE, prosecutor executor. But they all only exist for one reason, meaning the trust only exists for one reason. Not the courts per se, but the trust. And that is because there is a beneficiary. The beneficiary occurred before the trustee and before the prosecutor executor. The beneficiary occurred first because there was an estate or an asset, also referred to as an equity. So on that premise that all beneficiaries are connected to an estate or an equity, an asset, we have equity in that notion, or equity of law, equity of our estate. And a part of that estate, I would suggest, is our parliamentary system. Very important to note. So if you are in an elected democratic parliamentary system, if you are a part of a country under this means of operation, wouldn't that suggest that all ministers who are sworn to their position, and I would assume under oath, that they are taking an oath to step up and receive their administrative powers as, I would suggest, a trustee of their portfolio containing the estate on the books. In other words, all matters concerning specific areas relevant to the beneficiary. Now, for those out there, I just want to point out that the beneficiary is we, the people. Whether you're a taxpayer, whether you're on welfare, it doesn't matter. As a citizen of Australia, you're a part of the equity system that affords us all the liberty and the protection under trusteeship. Now, I would suggest that you do your research here, because all ministers under oath are in fact appointed a position as a trustee. Now, if you want to define trust law and go into the legalities of it, and to identify what the role and the responsibility, what the duty of care entails, it certainly doesn't involve dereliction of duty, which I see is happening here. The trustee's role is essentially to protect and preserve the nature of the assets and its worth, being the estate, to the beneficiaries, we the people. Now, this is not the case. We are being liquidated. We are being usurped, otherwise blocked, from being supposedly no longer able to access our rights to protest when we know something is wrong. When we can no longer act upon our conscience, then we have been violated. And this, to my way of understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is as far removed from any democratic procedure that I could perceive. In fact, it's in alignment with a dictatorship. And this is what all dictators have done before complete disarmament of a country and a complete takeover, complete military takeover. So I would be very concerned as to what may be installed down the track and what kind of unrest this may be a preempt to. But it's a very clever and cunning systematic dismantling of people being able to continue to use and access the protection that preserves all within a democratic society of what we know as inalienable rights. An inalienable right is something that you can't take away from a person, and it wasn't given by another man to you. These are rights that are afforded to you. You are born, we're all born with lodial rights, inalienable rights. They cannot be removed. However, if they are blocked, and if it is being done by our trustee, our ministers, does that constitute an act of war? Because if a violation is committed against the beneficiary by a trustee who is appointed supposedly to us under oath to administrate a trusteeship with conscience and respect, to honour and preserve the will of the people. And we have a will. And that's what this protest demonstrated today, is that we are enacting our will and we are voicing our will. And like a will is a testamentary trust, you, the ministers, have been appointed trustees to the beneficiaries in living now time to manage a living testamentary trust. Now, to deviate from the responsibility for which I would assume you would be sworn in, having taken an oath. I put it to you, how is it that you perceive that you have not broken your oath and committed a crime, usurped damages against the beneficiary, who ultimately underpins what the estate of the trust is, that you are appointed in the utmost of sworn integrity, for which you have abandoned, I would suggest constitutes a dereliction of duty, recklessness, unconscionable conduct, and possibly an act of war. I would advise anyone to research the definition of what constitutes an act of war. I may be wrong, but from my recollection, an act of war is when another robs you or blocks you from your path in life to take away something that belongs to you, whether it be material or rights. And in doing so, under the protocols of war, it is stated, so correct me if I'm wrong, but if my memory serves me correctly, if an act of war is being perpetrated against you, you are entitled to do whatever is necessary to reclaim what was taken away from you. Now, we have a good society of peaceful people who conducted a peaceful demonstration today to voice their opinions. But that's the rah-rah. That's going nowhere. So what I want to do today is provide a little simple detail outlining what I would suggest might be an appropriate passage of providing a remedy to this solution. Because to have a legislation put forward and supposedly approved for what we see today for this piece of legislation, to my way of perception, has overridden the principles of equity of law. Now, if this were a Supreme Court or a county court that are qualified to hear cases based on the merit of equity, would it not demonstrate that our rights, being the equity to maintain what is ours, which is our inalienable rights within the already drafted underpinning laws that our Supreme Courts here in Victoria already acknowledge, have in fact actually not been taken into consideration? So what I'm suggesting is that whatever bit of legislation has been drafted regarding the supposed banning of our right to speak out against what we know is unconscionable, suggests to me that this is not in fact a real law. And I would suggest to the Abbott government that what you are proposing is merely a presumption that you have given yourself law by whatever contractual arrangement you have to implement whatever kind of supposed court you think it is that has drafted this piece of legislation. Because I would recommend to everybody that this is a matter that needs to be reheard under trust law matters, because this is I believe this is a trust law case pertaining to the equity of law, and that it's a position of liability has occurred with our state government based on their position or presumption of their assumed jurisdiction, that they can remove or block the path, usurp us away from our right to exercise what remains always our right in any democratic society. What I've witnessed with this bit of legislation, I'm sure most people would agree, if they look into this bit of legislation and how it stands to affect all of us, is that this is nothing short of a dictatorship. Now, if I was living in Uganda a few decades ago, well, then I would expect something like that, but not in this country. And I would expect more intelligent and conscionable behaviour from any minister. Now, what I'm going to suggest here is that if ministers have this appointed position of supposed power to be able to do and affect all citizens of Australia, or our state here, being the beneficiaries of what is rightfully ours, then shouldn't the responsibility and the insurability, meaning a policy, as I believe judges, QCs, lawyers, politicians, have an insurance policy, an indemnity bond, which is to accommodate for failure if they are in breach of their duties and are found to be in contempt or in breach, in dereliction of their their lawful obligations. So if you have an insurance policy, a liability cover for failure, such as perhaps what it is that we may be witnessing in this case here today, then I would suggest that your position could be in some kind of jeopardy, because as a holder of a portfolio and your position of duty of care, responsibility and lawful obligation would suggest to anybody as a trustee that the beneficiary's rights have been severely neglected here. In other words, liquidated. You just can't do that, because under a lawful system and trust law, meaning a trustee and a beneficiary, we the people have the right to return to who we are, and that is to notify that we are the executor equally as the beneficiary. And do we have the right, as an executor, when we announce this, to order you to reinstate the recognition that we have and will always have, and that is our right to voice our opinion. Now, in any company or corporate operation, if you are caught to be in contempt of your position as a trustee, it's not a light penalty. You can be tried and convicted. And the damages in a case like this could be immense. Not to mention the opportunity to lawfully have these offenders removed by way of their own, this state's own lawful system. Now, people might say, well, how can this happen? Well, I would suggest when things get bad enough, take a look at what happened in Iceland. And don't just think that it can happen to Iceland. It's happened in Ireland. There are a list of countries that I could rattle, and we are in a very similar position. We're just further away from it occurring. We're just further back in the queue. Now, we are being liquidated of just about everything in this country because this country has been turned into a company, a corporation registered in Washington, DC. And for those who may laugh at this, we can back this up with the document, but today this is just done in a hurry. So what I'm saying is that there is a remedy here, and it already exists within our court system. It would require the participation of the appropriate judges who are already savvy with matters to do with equity of law. I'd like to just take you back. I'd like to point out a little avenue, a lesser known avenue, that most people would not be aware of. And it stands to greatly advantage us all, because we have been placed in the box seat of disadvantage by what appears to be quite corrupt agenda. I would put it to the Abbott government that their ethics, or lack of ethics I should say, and their AWOL of reasoning is terribly incompetent when it comes to being aware of any position of liability that may be addressed here to do with these derelict, quite aggressive tactics, which could be interpreted as an act of war, by the way. But don't take my word for it. Do your own research. I am only posing these as suggestions. I am not making these as facts. But it appears to me, based on the educational research that I've come to be aware of, is that failures at this level to conscionably serve the people, and I'll use that word, serve, because what we're witnessing here in a very short amount of time from the Abbott government, not to mention their degree of incompetence in certain areas to do with the social structure of humanity that affects all level of our anthropology, is that you would have to be brainless, imbecilic monkeys. Either that or a dictator, another Hitler in the waiting, to want to think that you can treat your people who voted you in with so much contempt. To think that you can usurp away all manner of rights to all levels of society. You are treating us all as though we are specimens in a cage, and that you are outside of it and free of it. But I would like to send this reminder to all of the members out there that serve in Parliament, is to remind you that you do have a role to serve, not steal. You are not providing servitude. You are committing a theft. You are violating all manner of reasoning that is fair and just, and that would be underpinned by a conscience. And I put it to you, Abbott, that you don't have a conscience. But I'm not going to apologise for your low level of intelligence, because only an imbecile could act in such a callous and unreasonable manner. And I'm sure that you have your own agenda and you think it's probably good for business. But we are all not to be treated as a part of this state-run corporation, such as the rest of Australia is all in the same boat. And we do have the evidence that Australia has been registered as a corporation in Washington, DC. We have the documents from the American Securities Commission to back this up. And I would like to return in history a little bit and take you back to the time when the Commonwealth of Australia was written just as that, the Commonwealth, meaning precisely that, of Australia. And then at the point in time where you inserted the word government, and it became the modification to the Australian Commonwealth Government of Australia. marked the beginning of the end. And from that point on, the presumption has continued to grow. The lie has become bigger and bigger. It has exercised itself to the point of a beast that is out of control, and that you are on its back, and you are steering it by its reins, and you are trampling over your people. Well, guess what, trustees, all ministers? You are sworn to a position of obligation, lawful obligation. And we are all not sleeping dummies. And I'm here to remind you all, everybody, that we hold the equity. We are the equity of this country. The voters, the taxpayers, the disabled, the citizens. We hold the equity. Without us, you are nothing. You do not rule over us. You are here to govern and protect and encourage prosperity for the best wishes of all, meaning we, the Crown, beneficiaries. To protect and preserve and to nourish the equity that clearly has not been recognised here. Are you really that stupid? You were voted in. And it's come to the point now where people really see through this political system. No party has all the answers because you're all trained on a faulty model. Your politics don't work. It's all rhetoric. And you forget what your position is under a governance system in a democratic society. You are to remain accountable at all times to the will of the people. The will that sets the trust, that provides the equity within your portfolio to administer under whole and just sworn trusteeship. And as a beneficiary and executor, I order you to review and clean up your act. The ailing system that you are aiding and proliferating across this land. The abuse that is affecting everybody. And it seems like there is no limit to how far you will take from us. The never-ending need of consumption for more taxes. You have let people slip through the system. You do not provide the housing that is needed for people who are sleeping on the streets, the disadvantaged, the ones who don't qualify for Centrelink but are being held in prisons for no reason, no crime, because they've been put out on the streets. It's appalling. Where are your ethics? Where are your principles? It is vile. And I call upon the listening ears of any good judge or Queen's Counsel to consider the due course, the due process, to have the reference of a correct and proper law, meaning in equity, to we the beneficiaries, that we take this, we challenge this in a Supreme Court, or if need be a High Court, for the purpose of identifying and overturning the presumption of law that has been the foundation of this phony, repulsive piece of legislation that has no validity. It is, I suggest, it is merely an act upon another act. One fiction on top of another fiction. A Bylaws Act, would I suggest? Or a Bylaws Act Amendment Act? Meaning a fiction upon another fiction, a presumption that you have assumed as your rightful position of jurisdiction to usurp away our rights. If our rights were as equal as breathing, is that not a right? Then if you legislated that you deemed it necessary to block our path from breathing, does that give you the right? No. You cannot remove the right. The right is always there, whether you influence our path to it or not. You do not have the right to remove what is an inalienable right to all of us. The right remains. However, if you choose to violate it, I suggest you are committing a crime. And just because you are the government, I remind you that you are ministers sworn to oath, and does not give you the right to get away with criminal activity or contempt. Would I suggest treason? Would I suggest an act of war upon your people? This is not the way of a healthy, hardy governance system, or anyone who aligns themselves to be a good leader. And I put it to you, Abbott, you are not a leader. Today marks you a dictator, and we are not behind you, and you are certainly not behind us. You have committed theft against our rights. It is a theft to prevent anyone of their lawful right, and we have lawful rights, and you cannot remove our lawful rights that are born to us all. Would you treat your family this way? I rest my case.
So we'll just leave you with a couple of questions to ponder before we close up today. Some of us may think that the issues around the world, all the protests, everything going on in the different countries at the moment are separate incidences. But you may want to consider the idea that they are in fact related. And there was a lot of attention today on Tony Abbott, which is good, but the question is, does Tony Abbott actually have as much power as an individual as we think he has? Or is he perhaps a puppet, a yes man to a higher power? And if he is removed, will he simply just be replaced by another puppet to continue the benevolent agenda of the global elite? Just something to ponder. Thank you so much for listening.